At the family reunion, Dad called my law degree expensive toilet paper in front of everyone, but they had no idea what was coming. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and this is the story of how my family's mockery turned into their biggest regret. The Martinez family Thanksgiving table looked like something straight out of a magazine. Mom had outdone herself with the centerpiece, autumn leaves and golden candles creating that perfect Instagram-worthy glow. The smell of turkey and Patricia's famous stuffing filled our childhood home in suburban Phoenix. Dad sat in his usual spot at the head of the table, remote in hand, switching between football games with the authority of a king ruling his domain. "Rebecca, honey, put that phone away," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that familiar note of gentle disapproval. "Family time means family time." I glanced down at my phone, which had been buzzing constantly with updates from my law firm. The Rodriguez v. MegaCorp case was heating up, and as lead counsel, I couldn't afford to miss anything. But looking around the table at my picture-perfect family, I slipped the phone into my purse. "Sorry, Mom, just work stuff." David looked up from carving the turkey with surgical precision. My older brother had always been the golden child, Harvard Law, corporate practice, the kind of success that made our parents' eyes light up at country club gatherings. "Still playing with those employment cases?" he asked with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "When are you going to get into real law, Becca?" There it was, the first crack in the facade. I forced a smile, cutting into my mashed potatoes with more force than necessary. "Helping workers get fair treatment is real law, David." "Of course it is, sweetheart," Dad chimed in, not even looking away from the TV. But David's got a point. Corporate law, mergers, acquisitions, that's where the real action is. That's where you make a difference in the economy. Jennifer, my younger sister, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. At 30, she'd carved out a successful marketing career, but somehow always managed to stay neutral in these family dynamics. Smart girl. "Rebecca's work is important too," she offered weakly, but I could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. Mom emerged from the kitchen carrying her famous green bean casserole, the same recipe she'd been perfecting for 20 years. "Oh, we're not saying it isn't important, honey. It's just, well, David's building something substantial, a real firm with real clients." The words hit like small knives, each one carefully placed to draw just enough blood to hurt without appearing malicious. This was the Martinez family way. Death by 1,000 tiny cuts, all delivered with smiles and the best of intentions. "I have real clients too, Mom." "Of course you do," she said, patting my shoulder as she set down the casserole. "Those sweet people who need help with their little workplace problems. It's very noble of you." Noble, like I was volunteering at a soup kitchen instead of running complex litigation that could change thousands of lives. My phone buzzed again, then again. The third buzz made Dad's eye twitch. "Rebecca, seriously, can't the world survive without you for 2 hours?" I wanted to tell him about Maria Rodriguez, the single mother of 3 who'd been fired for reporting sexual harassment, about the 200 other women who'd come forward with similar stories, about the federal investigation that was brewing. But looking at their faces, polite interest mixed with barely concealed irritation, I knew they wouldn't understand. "You're right, Dad. Sorry." The conversation moved on to safer topics. David's latest acquisition deal, Jennifer's promotion, Dad's golf handicap. I sat there, cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, feeling like a ghost at my own family dinner. As the months passed, the pattern became more pronounced. Family group texts would light up with congratulations for David's latest corporate victory, or Jennifer's marketing campaigns. But when I mentioned winning a significant motion or reaching a settlement milestone, the responses were lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," became Mom's standard response to any news about my work. David started referring to my practice as Rebecca's charity work in front of his colleagues when we ran into them around town, always with a laugh, always with that big brother affection that made it impossible to call him out without looking oversensitive. The real poison started spreading during Sunday dinners at our parents' house. What had once been casual family time became a weekly showcase for David's achievements, with me cast as the well-meaning but ultimately unsuccessful younger sister. David's firm landed the Morrison Industries account, Dad announced one Sunday, his chest puffed with pride. $40 million merger. Can you believe that? That's incredible, I said, and I meant it. David was brilliant at what he did. Meanwhile, Rebecca's still helping people fill out complaint forms, David added with that same laugh that was starting to make my jaw clench. It's more complicated than complaint forms, David. Of course it is, Mom said quickly, always the peacemaker. Rebecca works very hard, don't you, sweetheart? The way she said it made my work sound like finger painting, praised for the effort, not the result. I started noticing how they never asked about my cases anymore. When I tried to share news about the Rodriguez case gaining national attention, Dad would nod politely and change the subject to David's latest golf tournament or Jennifer's new marketing strategy. The gaslighting was subtle but persistent. When I mentioned feeling overlooked, Mom would look hurt and confused. Overlooked? Honey, we support everything you do. We're just so proud of David's success. Surely you can be happy for your brother? When I pointed out that they never seemed interested in my work, Dad would shake his head sadly. Rebecca, you're being too sensitive. We ask about your job all the time. Maybe you're just not listening. But I was listening. I was paying attention to every dismissive comment, every redirected conversation, every time my achievements were minimized or ignored entirely. The breaking point was building, and I could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon. The Rodriguez case was consuming my life in the best possible way. What had started as a single wrongful termination claim had exploded into a massive class action lawsuit against MegaCorp, one of the largest employers in the state. 200 women had come forward with stories of systematic harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. The media was starting to pay attention. The Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had launched their own investigation. This wasn't just another employment case. This was the kind of litigation that changed laws and saved lives. But my family remained obliviously focused on David's corporate dealings and Jennifer's latest marketing campaign. The night before the Martinez family reunion, I sat in my apartment reviewing depositions until 3 in the morning. My phone had been buzzing all evening with updates from my legal team, reporters requesting interviews, and messages from women across the country who'd heard about our case and wanted to share their own stories. I was exhausted, exhilarated, and completely isolated from the people who were supposed to matter most to me. The Martinez family reunion happened every 2 years, hosted by Dad's brother Uncle Mike at his ranch outside Scottsdale. Extended family would drive in from California, Colorado, and Texas. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who'd known us since childhood. It was supposed to be a celebration of family bonds and shared history. Instead, it became the scene of my complete humiliation. I walked into Uncle Mike's sprawling ranch house wearing a simple sundress, my hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking exactly like what I was, a lawyer who'd been working 18-hour days for months. The house was already full of relatives I saw twice a decade, all eager to catch up on family news and compare notes on their children's achievements. Dad was holding court near the barbecue pit, a beer in one hand and his phone in the other, showing photos of David's new downtown office space to anyone who'd listen. "You should see this place," he was telling Uncle Mike and Cousin Sarah. "Floor-to-ceiling windows, conference room that seats 20 people. David's really building something special." I grabbed a Diet Coke from the cooler and found a spot on the peripheral, watching the familiar dynamics play out. Mom was in the kitchen with the other women, coordinating side dishes and catching up on family gossip. Jennifer was playing with the younger cousins in the pool area, natural and comfortable in her role as the fun aunt. And then Aunt Carol spotted me. "Rebecca! Look at you, sweetheart. Still practicing law?" Still practicing law. Like it was a phase I'd eventually grow out of. "Yes, Aunt Carol, still practicing." "That's wonderful. What kind of law was it again? Family law?" "Employment law. I represent workers who've been discriminated against or harassed." Her smile became fixed and polite. "Oh, that's nice. Very important work, I'm sure." The The conversation died there, as it always did when I mentioned my actual job. People understood corporate law, criminal law, even family law. Employment law sounded like social work with a law degree attached. Dad's voice carried across the patio, growing louder and more animated as he described David's latest acquisition deal to a growing audience of relatives. $43 million. Can you believe that? My boy's handling $43 million like it's pocket change. Someone asked where David was, and Dad laughed. Flying back from New York as we speak. Big meeting with some Fortune 500 company. He'll be here for dinner, but that's the life when you're running a real law firm. Real law firm. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I found myself standing next to Dad's conversation circle, drawn like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me. "What about Rebecca?" Cousin Tom asked. "What's she up to these days?" Dad's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The pride and excitement dimmed, replaced by the polite interest you'd show for a neighbor's mundane hobby. "Oh, Rebecca's still doing her thing, helping people with workplace problems. Very noble work." There was that word again. Noble. Like I was a missionary working with lepers instead of a lawyer handling complex federal litigation. "Rebecca thinks she's a lawyer," Dad continued with a chuckle that made my blood freeze. "And she thinks she's a lawyer." The circle of relatives laughed, not maliciously, but with that comfortable family humor that comes from shared understanding. Rebecca, the dreamer. Rebecca, the idealist. Rebecca, who thought filing complaints made her a real attorney. I stood there for a moment, invisible in plain sight, watching my father dismiss my entire career with a casual joke, watching my extended family nod and smile like they understood exactly what he meant. That's when I knew with perfect clarity that I was done. Not just done with this conversation, or this reunion, or even this particular pattern of dismissal. I was done being the family joke, the noble little sister who played at being important while the real adults handled serious business. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that their complaint-filing daughter was about to win the biggest employment rights case in state history. They had no idea that within weeks, my name would be in newspapers across the country, that legal scholars would be analyzing my strategy, that other attorneys would be calling for advice on similar cases. They had no idea that the case they'd never bothered to ask about was going to change everything, but they were about to find out. I walked away from that circle of relatives, away from Dad's dismissive laughter, away from the casual cruelty that had become my family's default setting. I found a quiet corner of Uncle Mike's property and pulled out my phone. 17 missed calls. 23 text messages, all related to the Rodriguez case. The biggest one was from my co-counsel. "Rebecca, we need to talk. MegaCorp's lawyers want to discuss settlement. They're scared. Call me tonight." I looked back toward the house where Dad was still entertaining relatives with stories of David's corporate success and casual jokes about my hobby career, where Mom was probably telling the aunts about how proud she was of both her children, even though one was doing real law and the other was just helping people with their little problems. For the first time in months, I smiled. They wanted to settle. MegaCorp, with their army of corporate lawyers and unlimited resources, wanted to settle my complaint-filing case. The storm was coming, and they had no idea they were standing directly in its path. The drive home from Uncle Mike's ranch was a blur of desert highway and racing thoughts. Dad's words kept echoing in my head. "Rebecca thinks she's a lawyer." The laughter that followed, the casual dismissal of everything I'd worked for. But something had shifted in that moment of humiliation. Instead of the usual spiral into self-doubt, I felt something else entirely. A cold, clear anger that cut through years of accumulated hurt like a laser. I pulled into my apartment complex at nearly midnight, my phone still buzzing with case updates. The settlement discussion could wait until morning. Tonight, I needed to process what had just happened. Sitting in my living room surrounded by case files and legal briefs, I finally allowed myself to see the pattern clearly. This wasn't about my family not understanding my work. This was about systematic devaluation designed to keep me in my place. The grateful little sister who should be happy with scraps of attention, while David basked in unconditional praise. The next morning brought a call that would change everything. "Rebecca, you need to get down here," my co-counsel Marcus Rivera said, his voice tight with excitement. "MegaCorp's legal team wants to meet today. They're bringing their A-team from New York." I arrived at our downtown law office to find it buzzing with activity. Paralegals were organizing documents, junior associates were preparing briefing materials, and Marcus was pacing the conference room like a caged tiger. "They're scared," he said without preamble. "Really scared. Word is that the DOJ is considering joining our case. If that happens, this becomes a federal investigation with criminal implications." As I reviewed the latest depositions, I found myself thinking about Maria Rodriguez, the woman whose courage had started this avalanche. She was 34, my age exactly, with 3 kids and a mortgage she could barely afford after MegaCorp fired her for reporting her supervisor's harassment. During her deposition, Maria had looked across the table at MegaCorp's intimidating legal team and said quietly, "I just want other women to know they don't have to stay silent." That's when it hit me. Maria Rodriguez and I weren't so different. We'd both been systematically diminished by people in power who expected us to accept our assigned roles without question. The difference was that I had the legal training to fight back. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. MegaCorp brought 6 lawyers to our conference room, led by Patricia Blackwood, a partner from one of New York's most prestigious firms. She was exactly what you'd expect: perfectly tailored suit, silver hair, the kind of commanding presence that usually intimidated opposing counsel into submission. "Ms. Martinez," she said, extending a manicured hand, "I've heard quite a lot about you." I bet she had. A small firm employment lawyer who'd managed to organize 200 plaintiffs and attract federal attention wasn't supposed to exist in her world. The opening offer was insulting. $5 million split among all plaintiffs with a non-disclosure agreement that would silence them forever. Marcus and I exchanged glances. "Ms. Blackwood," I said, keeping my voice level, "I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't about money. This is about changing a system that has harmed thousands of women over decades." Her smile was patronizing. "Ms. Martinez, you're young, and idealism is admirable. But let's be realistic about what you're up against. We have unlimited resources and the best legal minds in the country. Your clients need compensation now, not some Pyrrhic victory that might come after years of litigation." There it was again. The assumption that I was too naive, too inexperienced, too small to matter. The same tone Dad used when he called my work noble. "Counteroffer," I said, sliding a document across the table. $50 million, comprehensive policy changes, and an independent monitor to ensure compliance. No NDA. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. "That's not reasonable. Neither is systematically harassing women for 20 years and expecting to buy silence for $5 million. The meeting ended with threats of protracted litigation and warnings about the costs of fighting a major corporation. As they filed out, Blackwood paused at the door. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Martinez. We don't lose." "Neither do I," I replied. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing our strategy when my phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, a family picture from last Christmas where everyone was smiling except me. "Hi, Mom." "Rebecca, honey, I wanted to apologize for your father last night. You know how he gets at family gatherings. He doesn't mean anything by it." The familiar script. Minimize, excuse, redirect blame to my sensitivity. "Actually, Mom, he meant exactly what he said, and so did everyone who laughed." "Sweetheart, you're being dramatic. We're proud of you. We've always been proud of you." I looked at the stack of depositions on my desk, each one representing a woman who'd been told she was being dramatic, too sensitive, misunderstanding the situation. "Mom, when was the last time you asked about my work? Really asked, not just made polite conversation?" Silence on the other end. "When was the last time you told someone about my cases with the same pride you show when talking about David's deals?" "That's not fair, Rebecca. David's work is just easier to understand." "No, Mom. David's work gets respect because he's a man in a corporate suit. My work gets dismissed because I help working-class women fight powerful men." I hung up before she could respond. 3 weeks later, the Department of Justice announced they were joining our case as co-plaintiffs. The news broke on a Wednesday morning, and by noon, my phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests from CNN, NBC, and the Wall Street Journal. The story was everywhere. Small firm lawyer takes on corporate giant. David versus Goliath employment case gains federal support. The attorney fighting for America's working women. I was in back-to-back interviews all day, explaining the case's significance, the broader implications for workplace harassment law, and what it meant for women across the country to see justice served. That evening, Marcus and I grabbed dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown to decompress. "You realize what just happened, right?" he said, raising his beer in a toast. "You just became one of the most prominent employment lawyers in the country. Every major firm is going to want to poach you." I thought about that for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have been thrilled by the recognition. Now, all I could think about was that my family still had no idea what I'd accomplished. The silence from the Martinez family group chat was deafening. While my phone exploded with congratulations from law school classmates, professional colleagues, and even strangers who'd seen the news coverage, my family said nothing. Finally, on Friday afternoon, a text from Jennifer. "Saw you on the news! Congratulations!" That was it. 48 hours after national news coverage of the biggest case of my career, and my sister's 3-word text was the only acknowledgement from my family. I was preparing for Monday's court hearing when my neighbor, Mrs. Chin, knocked on my door. "Rebecca, I saw you on Channel 12. My daughter called from Los Angeles. She saw you there too. You're famous." Mrs. Chin, who barely knew me beyond polite hallway greetings, was more excited about my success than my own parents. The courthouse on Monday was packed with reporters, women's rights advocates, and representatives from MegaCorp looking considerably less confident than they had 3 weeks earlier. Judge Harrison called for order as cameras clicked and reporters scribbled notes. "Your Honor," I began. "This case represents more than 200 women who were told to stay silent, to accept unacceptable behavior, to be grateful for jobs that came with a price no one should have to pay." As I presented our arguments, I felt the weight of every dismissive family conversation, every "that's nice, honey," every joke about complaint forms and noble charity work. This was real law. This was changing lives. This was everything I'd worked for, and it was happening whether my family understood it or not. Judge Harrison ruled in our favor on every major motion. MegaCorp's attempts to dismiss the case, limit the scope, and exclude key evidence were all denied. As we left the courthouse, Blackwood approached me one final time. "Impressive work, counselor. Perhaps we underestimated you." That weekend, the settlement offer came. $47 million, comprehensive policy changes, and an agreement to bring in independent monitors. No NDA requirement. We won. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Historic $47 million settlement in employment harassment case. My photo was on the front page of the Arizona Republic, and the story was picked up by national outlets within hours. By noon, my voicemail was full of congratulations from colleagues, interview requests from news programs, and job offers from major firms in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. My family's group chat remained silent. Wednesday afternoon, I was reviewing media requests when my phone started ringing. Dad's contact photo appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, I answered. "Rebecca, honey, I just heard. Mrs. Patterson next door told me you were on the national news. $47 million. I can't believe it." The sudden enthusiasm was jarring after months of dismissive indifference. "Yes, Dad. It's the case I've been working on for 8 months, the one you called complaint filing." "Complaint filing? I never said that. I've always supported your work." The gaslighting was immediate and shameless. "Dad, 3 weeks ago at the reunion, you told Uncle Mike I think I'm a lawyer, and everyone laughed." "That was just family teasing." "You know I'm proud of you." Mom got on the line. "Rebecca, we saw you on CNN. You looked so professional. We're telling everyone about our daughter, the famous lawyer." Our daughter, the famous lawyer. Not the daughter whose career they'd dismissed for years, but suddenly their famous lawyer daughter now that there was social capital to be gained. "We want to have a celebration dinner." Dad continued. Invite the whole family. Show everyone how proud we are. The irony was suffocating. They wanted to celebrate an achievement they'd spent years minimizing, to claim pride in work they'd never bothered to understand. That's interesting, Dad. What exactly are you proud of? What do you mean? The settlement, the money, being on TV. What about the women we helped? The policy changes, the message this sends to other victims? Silence. They were proud of the spectacle, the bragging rights, the reflected glory. They had no understanding of or interest in the actual work. I need to go, I said. I have interviews with the Times and the Post this afternoon. Wait! About that dinner. I hung up. Thursday brought a new wave of media attention. 60 Minutes wanted an interview. Harvard Law School invited me to speak at their employment law symposium. The National Women's Law Center offered me a fellowship. My life had fundamentally changed in the span of a week. That evening, sitting in my apartment surrounded by congratulatory flowers and interview requests, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For months, I'd been torn between wanting my family's approval and knowing I deserved better. The settlement had crystallized everything. Their sudden interest in my famous lawyer status only highlighted how shallow their previous dismissal had been. I thought about Maria Rodriguez, who'd called me crying tears of joy when the settlement was announced. You believed in us when no one else would, she'd said. You made us matter. That's when I understood. I'd been looking for validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of seeing my worth. My real family was the team of lawyers who'd worked 18-hour days on this case, the clients who'd trusted me with their stories, the mentors who'd guided me through complex legal strategies. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Jennifer stood in my doorway looking uncomfortable but determined. Can we talk? We walked to a coffee shop down the street, away from the phones and interview requests. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. A big one. I waited. I knew what they were doing to you. The dismissive comments, the comparisons to David, the way they'd changed the subject whenever you talked about work. I knew it was wrong, and I said nothing. Her honesty was surprising. I was protecting myself, she continued. It was easier to let them focus their expectations on David and their disappointment on you. I got to fly under the radar. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched the CNN interview and I finally understood what you actually do. You don't just file complaints, Rebecca. You change lives, you take on systems that hurt people, and you win. She paused, stirring her coffee absently. And because Mom and Dad are planning this huge celebration dinner, inviting everyone they know, talking about our famous daughter like they've been supporting you all along, it made me sick. I appreciated her honesty, but years of family dynamics couldn't be undone with one conversation. What they're doing now isn't about pride, I said. It's about social status. They want to claim credit for something they spent years undermining. I know, and you have every right to tell them no. That afternoon, I made my decision. I called my parents and told them I wouldn't be attending any celebration dinner. I wouldn't be participating in their revisionist history where they'd always been supportive. I wouldn't provide them with bragging rights for a career they'd consistently diminished. The reaction was predictable. Hurt feelings, accusations of ingratitude, claims that I was being petty and vindictive. After everything we've done for you, Mom cried. What exactly have you done for me? I asked. Name one time in the last 5 years that you've shown genuine interest in my work. She couldn't. 6 months later, I accepted a position with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. My work on the Rodriguez case had opened doors I'd never imagined, and I was ready to fight for justice on a national scale. The going-away party was held at Marcus's house, filled with colleagues who'd become friends, clients who'd become family, and mentors who'd seen my potential when others couldn't. Maria Rodriguez gave a toast to Rebecca Martinez, who taught us that our voices matter and our stories have power. As I looked around the room at faces full of genuine respect and affection, I realized I'd found what I'd been looking for all along. Not the approval of people who'd never understood my worth, but the recognition of those who'd witnessed my work and valued my contribution. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "We hear you're moving to Washington. Mom's very upset you didn't tell us yourself." I thought about responding, about trying once more to explain why their sudden interest felt hollow after years of dismissal. Instead, I put the phone away and rejoined the celebration. Some relationships can't be repaired, and some patterns can't be changed. But I'd learned something more valuable than family approval. I'd learned to recognize my own worth and surround myself with people who saw it too. 3 weeks later, I was sworn in as a civil rights attorney at the Department of Justice. The ceremony was attended by colleagues, friends, and clients whose lives had been changed by our work together. My family wasn't there, but for the first time in my life, their absence felt like freedom rather than loss. I'd spent years seeking validation from people who were determined to diminish me. Now I understood that the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. I was Rebecca Martinez, Department of Justice attorney, champion for working women across America, and I'd built it all without their help or approval. That was victory enough.